You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another edition of Banner Friday, which is our weekly show talking about IU hoops that is presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel and that we usually reserve just for our private community members. But this week we are switching it up a bit. We are making Banner Friday available in our main podcast feed here for you folks watching and listening on YouTube to kind of give our non-community members a little bit of a taste of the extra content that you get when you sign up, and to help provide your IU men's basketball fix, since we canceled Assembly Call Radio last night with the IU women taking on and beating number 5 Iowa. So this is just a little taste, and if you want more, not just of Banner Friday, but also of Tony Adranya's IU Film Room and Coach Tonsoni's Coach's Corner, my statistical deep dives, and all the great daily conversations that are had by members in our community about the men's team, about the women's team, about other IU sports, then you should consider joining our community. You can learn more at assemblycall.com/community. We do have a special free trial offer that's going on right now. We're going to take that away soon, but we want to give you a chance to, kind of try things out, see if it's right for you before you commit. So it's assemblycall.com/community, assemblycall.com/community, and you'll have access to all of this stuff every week. And we'd love to have you in there because, goodness gracious, Coach, this is setting up to be quite a February here between the men's team and the women's team. There's going to be a lot of fun basketball to talk about, it looks like.
Yeah, there's been some winning going on in Bloomington, which is nice to talk about, nice to have, nice to look forward to as the games start piling up every 2 or 3 days on both sides. And it's just fun, man. That women's team was remarkable in their win last evening. Just a program that you want to see build, and it was great when they won the NIT, and then it just kept building and building and building, and now you see the fruits of all that labor, the Coach Morton and staff and all of the young ladies that have been in that program. It's just good to see.
It is. It is. So today, Mike DeCourcy is going to be here. He's our usual guest here on Banner Friday, so he'll be with us to talk about the Hoosiers, to talk about the Big Ten. And then we have another special guest, Brendan Quinn, will be here. Brendan Quinn from The Athletic and from the Moving Screen Pod to talk specifically about the matchup that is coming this weekend for Indiana with Michigan. And then, Coach, we opened up the mailbag, and we got a lot of really good, interesting questions. So whatever time we have left after we talk to those two fine gentlemen, we will answer some of your really good mailbag questions that you put in. So that is what we have on tap here. For those of you who are here live, we will be watching the chat, so feel free to pop in. John says hi. Good to see you, John. So, yeah, pop in questions, topics that you want us to hit. We'll be happy to cover those as well here with me and Coach Tom. So very excited to
I need to change my handle on
You do. You do. The funny thing as we wait for Mike to get here, the thing about the women's team is coming into the year, like my big question about them was, okay, last year it was really built on toughness and defense, right? And you had Allie Patberg and, Nikki Cardano-Hillary, and they were such, they were a little bit undersized and they didn't shoot it quite well enough, but man, you knew the defense and the toughness were going to be there. And that was kind of my worry this year. It's like, okay, we've got the shooters in, but are we going to lose? And man, we have not. I mean, the toughness, the defense, it's all still there. And now they've just added so much more firepower offensively, which just makes them really, really tough to deal with. So
it's Coach Tom to ground control.
I love how this is catching on.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Man, they can shoot the basketball. They share the basketball. They got inside, outside. And then they have some people who can guard too. I thought they did a reasonable job on Clark yesterday, and they got a huge win. And I know they got some tough games coming up on their schedule, and they're going to have to play that way to secure that number 1 seed, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Here with us, he is a longtime writer for the Sporting News and an analyst for the Big Ten Network. He's the Mike that we all want to be like. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the great Mike DeCourcy here joining us on Banner Friday. How are you, Mike?
I didn't properly prepare for this because I didn't know that I was going to be double teamed. I didn't know that I was going to be in the company of, twice the greatness. So I hope I'm okay.
Mike, we've won 7 out of 8 games. There's just so much excitement, enthusiasm. We just want to get on here and talk about this as much as possible.
Absolutely.
All right, before I hand this part over to Coach, I have to ask the first question, Mike, on behalf of so many IU fans in our community and on Twitter. Why are you so much lower on the Hoosiers in bracketology than other people are? We've got to know.
One of the things I love is that I'm so much lower because they're down by one line. And honestly, I haven't checked today to see where Lenardi has them.
It was 4 yesterday, I think.
If you checked my bracket today, you know that I did move them up. I do have them higher at this point. Let's see. I have them as a 5 now. You may be shocked to know that is the consensus position for the Hoosiers on the bracket matrix, which now contains 99 different online brackets. I will say that I think the difference, I suspect, I've never talked to those guys about how they do their deals or anything. I don't really want to know. But in scouting them, so to speak, I think they're a little bit more analytically oriented than I am. Especially for me, the analytics are important in that if you play to the analytics, then you'll get to where the analytics say you should be. So I'll wait until you do that. And I look at a team that has, prior to Rutgers, 3 quad 1 wins and say, 6 is pretty generous. I mean, there are 3 quad 1, like I think Wisconsin has at least 4, maybe 5 off the top of my head. They have 4 or 5 and they're not in. Mm-hmm. So I thought that I was being pretty generous to an extent. Yeah, they have 5 with the Hoosiers, but I wasn't really being generous because I think they have performed exceptionally well and have shown the quality of team that they can be at their best and are now. They've shown the capacity to play without Xavier Johnson, and to the degree that it almost, you want Xavier Johnson to come back. But I think they're going to have to be careful about how they reintroduce him to the team because they have a formula now that is top 20 good at minimum. And so they have to be careful with that. But that's the reason why is that I'm not going to say, okay, well, Ken Pom and the net have them at 15 or whatever it is. So that's why they have to be higher. People who yell at me on Twitter all the time will say, well, Ken Pom has them at this and the net has them at this, and they exclude the results metrics. I have never, ever, one time in 4 years of doing this, not one time have I had someone come to me and say, you have our team as a 4 seed and strength of record has us as a 2. Nobody says that. But that's on the team sheet too. And in a lot of ways, it's for me at this time of year, that's my most important metric, because it's basically what you've accomplished, and what you can accomplish is what the net and what the Ken Pom and Sagarin say, what you're capable of accomplishing, but you have to play to that in order to earn the victories that ultimately end you up on the higher seed lines.
Mike, it's that time of season. At Delphi Bracketology, we're getting it left and right, too. Been told to keep trying. Comments like that show up on Twitter. And it's
Brian, I got to tell you, my favorite maybe ever. And like when I got reamed by Butler fans on my very first bracket ever, that was pretty good because I had them like as a 3 seed and everybody else had them as a 1. And that was my favorite ever because like it was literally like my first try. But my favorite of the year was the person who yelled at me because I put Vermont in the bracket as the representative of their conference. And they are 2 games in the lead of their conference. But if I really were paying attention, I'm told, then I would have Bryant, so, which is like in third place. So, that's my favorite so far this year.
They always come back at you with the selective criteria. The conference standing is the one we get all the time. So-and-so is 8-5 in conference, but they're 11-10 overall or something.
Exactly.
So welcome to the Indiana side of that. North Carolina State, Florida, those are some fan bases that have gotten after us pretty hard in the past. But what is it about Indiana's resume that is outstanding? And then what is somewhat concerning for us bracketologists as we compare them? That's the other thing people don't quite understand. You compare them to a group of 4 or 5 around them.
Right.
What's the strength and what's the weakness of Indiana's resume right now?
Well, the strength is that they have the best home win that anybody has by far. The best home win. Rutgers has the best win because they went to Purdue and won. But Indiana has the best home win. That's the number one thing on their resume. But then they follow that up with 2 high-end road wins over the first place team in the Big East Conference, Xavier, and a legit contender in the Big Ten, if anybody's a contender beyond Purdue, in Illinois, both on the road. So that's the strength of the bracket, along with the fact that they're entirely clean in quad 1 and quad 3 and quad 4, 9-0. So no blemishes, nothing you have to explain away. There's not a single loss on this field, on this bracket in terms of the opponent that you have, on the resume, that in terms of opponent that you have to explain. The margin of the Penn State game, yeah, okay, that was bad. But everything else is explicable. And most of the results, you were impaired by injury. Most of the losses, you were impaired by injury to some degree. Iowa, Rutgers, Kansas, Arizona, all obvious. And again, you're not getting a pass for that in selection, but you're not worried about selection. You're getting a pass for that in seeding to an extent if you perform, if you find a new formula or cycle the old formula, if you're able to do that, and win big with the reconstituted lineup. So IU right now, as a relatively whole team, I think you have to look at this now. I mean, when Dave Revson talked to Xavier Johnson on Tuesday when Rutgers was in town, Xavier was talking about, I'll be back before the end of the year. So if that's the notion, you got to look at it as, okay, these are your Hoosiers, and hopefully Xavier comes back as much at this point for his sake as for anybody else, as anything else. So these are your Hoosiers, but your Hoosiers are like 7-1 with big time wins, including Rutgers and Purdue at home. So I think at that point, you look at that and you say, okay, that's a team that the committee can't afford to underseed because they've got a player in TJD who can dominate a game. And, they're not like the committee's not rooting for their number 1 and number 2 seeds to make the Final Four. But they wouldn't have number 1 and number 2 seeds if the idea wasn't to make their paths as clear as possible toward the Final Four. So that's what they're trying to accomplish. Well, if you put IU as a 7 seed, well, I mean, that's not very nice to Kansas or whoever is the 2 seed. Wait a second. Now it wouldn't be them probably because they played already, but it might. So that's not right. So that's why you start to creep up the bracket when you look at who they are and you start to try to break out what have they done as this team. So
Indiana's won 7 out of 8. TJD has played out of his mind. Hood Schifino has been a big part of that too. Who is the next player to get that deserves a little more accolades for this turnaround? Because I think there's a couple that you could go towards, but yes, those two have just shined and are a big part. But there have been some nice performances in these 8 games by others. Who would you say is that next level person that's helped the Hoosiers?
Well, you don't get to 7 and 8 without just about everybody in your rotation making significant contributions along the way. But the one player that kind of stands out to me is Miller Kopp, for reasons that we've discussed, I think, before, that they haven't taken full advantage of his offensive abilities. But he has worked to find a way to matter enough to stay on the floor at a relatively low shot number. I mean, in that 8 games, he's taken 27 threes. So that's less than, that's basically 3 a game. With his percentages, he should be getting close to 4 or 5, but he's not. And he doesn't take a lot of field goal attempts that aren't threes. So there aren't a lot of 2-point shots that are on top of that 27. So even without taking a high number of field goal attempts, he's still on the floor. In that 8 games, he's played 30 minutes in all but one. The only game he didn't play 30 was Purdue, where he played 29. So they think that he's adding something. And I think you're starting to see that he's guarding his man better. He's getting involved in he's diving on the floor for loose balls and creating deflections and getting extra possessions. He's become a much more complete basketball player than he ever was in his first 3 years at Northwestern or last year at IU. He's become a much more complete player. And he's bringing a level of edge that I don't think any of us knew he had. I mean, we didn't think he believed in himself for 3.5, 4 years. And that was one of the weaknesses of his game, was that he didn't always trust himself. And now he trusts himself so much that he's going to battle for his teammates. And it doesn't have to be about throwing elbows or anything. That's not what, that gets you in trouble. That puts your team at a disadvantage because you get an F2 or an F1 or whatever. He's out there and he's making sure that his area, wherever he is, he owns that spot. And I don't mean that spot isn't fluid, but wherever he is, like, you're not messing with that. And I think that has really changed IU's team personality as well.
So we talked a while back about Indiana's identity was more defensive minded than anything else, and they needed to return to that defensive mindset. And we've talked KenPom already. They haven't moved up the KenPom numbers. They're kind of stuck at 41, but Indiana's defense has improved greatly during this stretch. And then I look at the standings today, and it looks like the Big Ten, if you want to be on top of the Big Ten, you've got to play some outstanding defense. There's 7 teams in the top 30. You add IU playing better. That's an 8th team in the Big Ten, which makes it so tough. But how would you rate the overall defensive play in the Big Ten, and then some top teams defensively? And is that a key to winning the Big Ten?
I think that league play is probably a little bit more important because you play more road games. Obviously, but you play road games in a league, and in a Big Ten tournament or NCAA tournament, you play no road games. You may play against a crowd in some instances, but you play no road games. And so defense does travel. It does go wherever you go. Rutgers hasn't been bad defensively, I don't think, in just about any game. I suppose if I went through, I might find one where their point per possession number was poor. But on the road at IU the other night, their defense was very good, as it usually is. They did not give up a ton of points to IU, but they couldn't score enough to support a reasonable road defensive performance. So now that part of that is they're a limited offensive team, and part of that is IU is a very significant defensive team. IU's defensive numbers are weighed down by that one awful stretch, in particular, when Race got hurt and they didn't know how to put the D back together for a while. It took them until the Wisconsin home game on that Saturday afternoon before they could put together a defensive effort that was respectable without Race. And then Race comes back, and then the defense makes sense again. So yeah, I think that number is deceptive regarding what they've been defensively over the last 2 months. And even if you go back to when they were whole at the start of the year, I mean, I think they were doing a reasonable defensive job then, at least in terms of, trying to hold teams down and be effective. They gave Xavier 79 points in that game, but Xavier's one of the best offensive teams in the country. They have an option at every position when they're healthy. So I think that's the difference there. And then there was also the two games, the Arizona game and the Kansas game, that they were not whole. They didn't have Jalen, and they really struggled to find any defensive formula without him.
Hey, Mike, you mentioned Race Thompson, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on how Mike Woodson has handled the reintegration of Race Thompson. Obviously a guy who's not himself physically struggling on the offensive end, but against Minnesota and Purdue made huge plays down the stretch to win the game. How do you feel about how that's gone so far?
Well, I as I said, I think that first of all, Race makes your defense make sense, because without him in this league, it puts so much pressure on Trace. Now, he's got enough already, and he does often go head-to-head against the best big guys in this league. Probably the majority of the possessions, he's the one guarding the post. But that's an awful big burden. And in some leagues, it wouldn't be. I'm sure that I could find leagues where that would not be a huge deal. I mean, I think in the ACC, you certainly have Armando Bacot. But there's not an excessive number of great big guys. But I mean, this is by the time we get through, I think it's Sunday after. Is it tomorrow that IU plays? I've got
Michigan.
Yeah,
yep.
Tomorrow. Okay, so by the end of tomorrow, okay, the last 8 days for him will be Zach Edey, Cliff Amore, and Hunter Dickinson, and significant responsibility in all three of those matchups. In addition to them guarding you, which is a physical load as well. So I think Race gives you that ability to be big and not totally reliant on Race in that circumstance. Excuse me, on TJD in that circumstance. And I think that he is a effective defensive rebounder. That's something that certain teams out there, like Xavier right now, I mentioned before. Xavier has to close out possessions now. They're not a great defensive team to begin with, but they have given themselves over to being able to get the big stop. Outscore you and get the big stop, kind of like a run and shoot football team. You got to get the big stop, or the fact that you can score all these buckets isn't going to matter. And against Providence, they were scoring great against Providence's D, but then without Zach Freemantle, who's hurt right now, they'd get a first shot stop against Providence and then wouldn't be able to secure the defensive rebound. Well, that Race helps you with that. So his return, when you can get that rough shot, that tough two, and you can get that miss, he helps you get the rebound, whether it's coming into his hands or him gumming up an opposing player with a good box out and TJD chases the ball down. All of that helps. And it would be nice if he could return to being the offensive player he was before he was hurt all of last year, because we know he can stretch a defense. He can score in the post. He's not the most fluid post scorer, but he's really physically powerful and sudden. And so he can bother teams. He doesn't have quite the same physicality with the basketball as he did before he was injured.
So you've talked about a couple guys that us Hoosier fans really appreciate the way they play, Miller Kopp and Race Thompson, and you could classify them as glue guys. So those are our glue guys, but there's a lot of good players in the Big Ten that Indiana competes against on a given night, and we know the Dickinsons and we know the Stars, but who would be some of your top glue guys in the Big Ten that we as Indiana fans need to take a look at or appreciate a little bit?
This is going to shock you, but one of them plays for Purdue. It's like there should be, like, how everybody has a PF, TJ, Trace Jackson Davis, and a PG for Jalen Hood-Schifino. They should just have a GG, because they always got a glue guy at Purdue. And in this case, it's Ethan Morton, who is an amazing glue player because of his ability to lock up on defense. And, I was on Big Ten Live earlier today. I'm on every Friday with Dave Revson, and usually it's been Andy Katz, and today was Trent Meacham. We've had different other analysts there in addition to me. And we talked about, I talked about this one particular possession last night that just fascinated me in the first half of the Iowa game, when I watched Ethan race back on defense to cut off the basketball on a potential fast break. And Iowa likes to run. So he's in the middle of the lane and he stops the point guard with the basketball, which because he does that, it leaves Braden Smith in a matchup against Chris Murray. So he knows right away that he's got to fix this. So he waits until there's a certain action that gives him just a little window, and then he gets Braden off of Chris and exchanged onto the point guard, and then he gets back on Chris, and then he cheats down to the post to try to, because there's a potential drive down to the lane, and then he closes out on Murray to force a tough shot on a three-pointer that misses. And like all of this happens, and nobody's going to notice it unless you're attuned to that. I was watching the game and I'm like, wait a second, what did he do there? So I went back and I followed him all the way from where he was on the offense and how he took off as soon as the ball went up so that he could make sure he was back, and all the rest of those machinations that I just described. And I don't know why it caught my eye, but right there in that moment, you could see why he plays, why a guy who's basically averaging 4 points a game, gets a starting spot on the number one team in the country. He did also make a 3 last night, which was nice for him and nice for them because it makes you honor him. You can't play 4-on-5, 5-on-4. But that's to me, the classic glue person. Caleb McConnell for Rutgers, a do-everything player. Be nice if those shots dropped a little bit more. Obviously, it didn't hurt your guys the other night that they didn't. But when they do, he's a terrific. I mean, he's a terrific all-around player. But he does everything they need, especially at the defensive end. The reigning Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. I like Dante Scott a lot at Maryland. That's a guy who, a lot of programs, man. He's been there. I think this is his 5th year now. I'm not sure. It's at least his 4th. Yep. But a lot of programs, Dante Scott's checking out at some point and transferring. Coaching change, interim coach, never gets never has become a first option. Jameer Young comes in and he's a 20-point scorer. Wait a second. I've been here all this. No, He just plays hard. He goes and gets the ball. When he's open, he'll take a shot, but he never chases one. He never forces action. He never hunts one. I love that about him. He's been there doing that since his first day in the uniform. And I wrote down Trey because even though we talked about the other two as glue guys, I think Trey, because he contributes in so many different areas, he stitches everything together. The transition game, transition D, he gives you a secondary point guard to an extent because his passing ability for a wing is elite. He guards his guy. So I put him down, and then I have to have a point guard. So of all the point guards in the league, the one that I would go with would be AJ Hoggard, because he's so physical. He's he can get the ball downhill. He's hard to drive the ball on because he's so strong. And he's good enough on the ball that they give it to him more often than they give it to Tyson Walker, who's a more dynamic scorer, can get deep a little bit better. AJ's a straight line driver. Tyson can go a little bit sideways and get moving. But because he's so physical, they like to have the ball in AJ's hands, and he's finding guys to the rate of nearly 6 assists a game. So that's my glue guy point guard.
Those are guys that make coaches look good. They're not in a box score, but they make winning plays, and then the coach gets to go in and talk about, how good their team is. But, you have all 5 of those. Good list. We're going to boo Ethan Morton just because he's at Purdue, but we do believe that he has some skill as a young man. But no, that's a great list. And Mike, before we let you get out of here and enjoy your weekend, is the Big Ten solidifying in some – I know there's a big mess in the middle, but it still seems like there's maybe 2 or 3 teams that are playing really well, and then that middle, and then some teams that have fallen to the bottom. Kind of, maybe your top teams, and do you think that teams are starting to find their spot here in the Big Ten as far as rankings?
Well, I think that
standings?
Obviously Purdue has. I mean, there's no question about that. And I think the league title is theirs to lose, and they'd probably have to like completely kick it to not win it. So there's that. But beyond that, Indiana has found its way without a doubt. But the league's like, okay, prove it. That's the way it works in the Big Ten. Now you got to go to Illinois tomorrow, and then you got to go a couple of games away to Wisconsin. And then you got to play Michigan with Hunter all over again, and you got to go to Penn State. So it's not easy in this in the Big Ten to hold on to that. I think they will, because I think they have found something. I think Jalen's emergence. I'm not sure that we wouldn't have seen this early. I don't just mean earlier, but I mean early. If you didn't have an incumbent point guard, and if they hadn't spent the entire preseason planning to play 2 point guards. The ball, when you play 2 point guards, that means that whoever gets it can go. But most of the time you're looking for one guy, because he happens to be more suited to just playing point guard, and the other guy can do a little bit more. And that's kind of the way it works out here. X was a point guard. That's who he is. And if you take the ball out of his hands, he's a lesser player. Plus, it's hard to mismatch guys. If you had a guy who was a great on-ball defender, but a meager ball handler and passer, you might do that. But it's always a little bit of effort to do that. The flow is better when your point guard defends the other team's point guard. So that's another reason why Xavier was the obvious choice to be the ball dominant guy. So then you lose Xavier for a couple of games, and then all of a sudden you lose him for a significant amount of time, and that's very disruptive. So it took Jalen a while to fully regain his comfort, not necessarily confidence, but just his comfort at being the guy who had the ball all the time. It's a different deal, and he has to still measure, to an extent, he still has to measure, when's it me, when's it them? A lot of point guards, like Sule Boom at Xavier, I keep using Xavier as a example. They're playing Butler tonight. Maybe that's why it's on my mind. I don't know. They're in town. But Sule Boom is a guy who will run the show, run the offense, and if it comes back to him, he's like the best get-back guy of anybody. Like, if it recycles to him, you better be in the play, because it's going up and it's probably going in. He's the best in the country at that. So for Jalen, it's a little different. He's not really a guy who's like waiting for it to come back to him. If he sees an opening early in the offense and the ball is in his hands, he's going to take it. And that's okay, because it's one of the things that makes him great. You want him to do the things that make him great, as long as they are intelligent things. And when he drives the ball to 6 feet and drives or 8 feet and drives the defender back 2 feet and he's wide open, that's a good shot, because the defense is off balance because they're not expecting a shot yet. And he's going to make most of those. He's not going to make 100%, but he's going to make a significant majority of those shots. That's his play. So as he had to get back to understanding that when it was okay to do that. So it's been an evolution for him. He's basically been 2 different players this year. And now for the last 8 games, he's been this player. And you've seen over that course of time an escalation in his efficacy that is, turning Indiana from a pretty good team that's going to make the tournament to a team that people are legitimately talking about as a threat to make a deep run. So I think that he is, in that sense, a very important component of everything that has gone right. And that's, to me, why when we talk about having a chance to do well, that it's that evolution that's had to happen because of necessity. And I don't even remember what the question was, but I did need to make the point about why IU has arrived at this point in the season with this much promise.
You answered it perfectly. It's Purdue, and then IU's the second best team, and they're going to kick everyone's butt going out. They're going to have to prove it, but you just said we're evolving, and so yes, you answered the question. But I think Indiana, Rutgers, Purdue are those top teams, and you have Illinois and Iowa that also can make a run. Would you agree?
Yeah,
that's
Rutgers,
kind of the pecking order.
Rutgers defense is good enough to keep them in every game. The offense has disappointed me a little bit in terms of its progress. I think there are players there to be better than they are. I think Paul Mulcahy, I don't know why, the guy can get 6-7 assists a game, and he does on occasion. I don't know why that doesn't give them more definition to their offense. I think that they could get more quality shots than they do. And that's what's holding them back from being really dynamic in this league. And it's got to change for them to survive their next stretch and for them to excel in Chicago and then to do well in the NCAAs. They have to find more offense. You're not going to 61-60 your way to 2 victories in the NCAA tournament unless you get the best matchups ever. And so that's a problem for them. Illinois is the team that, to me, is the wild card. When Matthew Meyer is on, one, he's essentially unguardable by anybody in the Big Ten and probably by anybody in the country. You got a 6'9" guy who can drive it and hit from 24 feet. And look, Baylor Shireman for Creighton is a guy who can shoot from 40, and he's really skilled. And he can get to open areas because he's so skilled. Like, his skill is elite, but he's not super dynamic. So he's not going all the way to the rim very often. Unless he gets the perfect lane, the kind of lanes that, frankly, the Hoosiers were giving up for that one little stretch. Unless he gets that, he's not going. But Matthew can do that. Matthew can get you off balance. I mean, he's not Michael Jordan, but he can get by you and take it all the way to the rim. So that's the team that of all the teams in this league, I think that they are really dangerous, but really hard to figure out what you're going to get. If they get everything together, they're really dangerous because they've got a big guy now. They've got a point guard who's playing fluidly. They've got 2 wings who are, high-end college players. And both of them have a chance to play in the league. And Meyer, honestly, to me, is a guy who, if good Matthew Meyer were the only Matthew Meyer, to me, he's a borderline first-round pick. So that's the team that I just can't put a pin on. And I think for them, to an extent, starting tomorrow, they're going to tell us who they are.
Yep. I think they're pretty well coached, which is an inside joke with some of our fans here on the Assembly Call. But, Mike, thank you for joining us on this Banner Friday. Always good. It's been a great run since we started winning a little bit. It's made for some more enjoyable conversations. But we appreciate what you do for us and what you do with the Big Ten Network and the Sporting News. And we will see you next week on the Banner Friday.
My pleasure, guys. Great to be with both of you.
Have a good weekend.
All right. And so Mike DeCourcy leaves us. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, that now making his first appearance on the Assembly Call, he's one of the best sports writers on the planet, like seriously the kind of writer that you drop everything to read because he's that good. He covers college hoops and golf for The Athletic. He co-hosts the Moving Screen podcast with Dylan Burkhart of Hoops, which is my favorite Big Ten basketball podcast, and one that we talk a lot about on here. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Brendan Quinn. How you doing, Brendan?
After that greeting, I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I don't know why you would have me over Dylan on a Michigan week, but I just kind of make everything up. Dylan actually knows what he's talking about.
Well, Dylan and Alex, they always do their thing, and everything is like a joint episode. So
that's fair.
We let Dylan and Alex nerd out over on their show, and we'll have the more fun conversation here.
Got co-opted a long time ago. That's fair.
Well, hey man, we missed you while you were gone, but it's great that you're back, ready for the stretch run. I thought it was hilarious that when you left, had to take some time off. The last game Indiana played was the Penn State game. And then you come back, and the first Indiana game that you watched was Maryland. And so you're like, what's all the fuss about? This is the same Indiana team that I've been watching. You've had a chance now to kind of watch the Purdue game, watch the Rutgers game. What are your, before we jump in and talk a little bit about Michigan, just give us your impression of the Hoosiers right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on with that description. When I got back, I was just terribly confused watching the Maryland game, and there was like all this building noise around like Hood Schifino. Like, man, this might be a freshman of the year, a late push. And I watched this game. I'm like, I mean, this looks awful. What are we talking about here? But yeah, I mean, the last 2 games, watched them all the way through, and was just really impressed by what looks like a older team that's really kind of found itself in the second half of certain guys' senior years. And you've seen this. This is like the beauty of college basketball, right? Is when you see teams that kind of take the long road to go to get where they're going, and then suddenly you can see the pieces fall into place in real time. And I think Indiana's a great story right now in college basketball. Both of you have this incredible character in Trace Jackson Davis, then you have this incredible kind of character in what Indiana basketball is and what it represents to the sport, and its kind of dormant beast that me as like an outsider, not a Midwest guy, not someone who grew up watching Big Ten basketball, like I wanted to see Indiana basketball, like the real thing. And because I got here right after the 2013 season. And so like those like kind of iconic Michigan, Indiana games, I was there for it. I saw some good ones, but I missed the really good stuff. And now I feel like I'm kind of getting a glimpse of it. Would love to get down there before the end of the year. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, we've basically had like 2 good months of basketball since the end of the 2013 season, and that was the 2016 Big Ten season. And outside of that, it hasn't been really good. I'm curious. I was going to ask this question later, but with what you just said, I'll ask it now. You write some of the best feature articles that I've written. I mean, you're really good at it. I have emailed the people over at IU and said, we need to get Brendan in here so he can write an article about IU. Like, I'm curious, if you got embedded, with this Indiana team, and you hinted at it there a little bit, like, what would be the storylines? What would be your hypothesis for where the most interesting stories are to tell on this team and this program?
Me personally would be spending, a day or 2 completely locked in with Trace Jackson Davis. My dog's causing trouble here. Sorry. So would be spending a day or 2 with Trace Jackson Davis. And, I know his story has been told and things like that, but what happens sometimes with seniors, that especially at a place as high profile as IU, is like, man, they build up a shell, right? And it is like Trace is so polished and so kind of aware, I think, of every word he says and how he comes off and what he means, both in terms of his own value as an individual athlete and also to the IU brand and things like that. That I wonder, spending real time with him, having some real conversations that can kind of crack the egg a little bit and get into like what's really kind of crawling around in that mind of his at this point. I know Trace is the cheap answer because he's a first-team All-American candidate, but like I find him fascinating, and the road that he's taken, certainly uniquely his own. And I think it's really like the good stuff about college basketball. The guy who sticks it out, the guy who has every reason to leave or every reason to bail or every reason to complain or every sticking it out through multiple coaches. I think this is why we as people and fans like college hoops as opposed to other alternatives. He's a guy who is going to have a place in lore at Indiana for a long time, and that's saying something. So I would just love to know him more on a personal basis and find out, I don't know, what's there.
Yeah. That's great. Boy, that is a story I would love to read. So,
well, okay, make it happen.
Maybe I'm working on it as much as I can, man. I'm working on it. All right, so let's turn our attention to Michigan a little bit. I linked in our community to the conversation between Alex and Dylan. If you want to really nerd out about the matchups and all that stuff, go there because they really get into it. But give us kind of the broad strokes about this Michigan team. Like, we know about Hunter Dickinson. Who are some of the other guys now that are playing kind of the starring roles? And just generally, what's going right for them when they're playing well and what's going wrong when they're not?
Yeah, I've been fascinated kind of watching the the growth, the development of their young guards. And, I mean, they're basically playing a 6-man rotation, but they're three kind of key young pieces. Point guard Doug McDaniel, who obviously replaced Jalen Llewellyn, blew out his leg earlier this year. Doug was a guy who in the preseason we were talking about playing 8-10 minutes a game, backup freshman, kind of that Frankie Collins role from a year ago, kind of behind the upperclassman senior transfer. And obviously that didn't happen. And now Doug has just been thrown into the deep end and kind of figuring out as he goes along. He's a dynamic player to watch, a tiny guy who just can fly all over the place and, does a lot of things that you say, I'm guessing the staff didn't want that. And then he makes a couple plays where you're like, man, you can't teach that stuff. So he brings a ton to the table. Juwan Howard is a projected first-round NBA pick because he's a dynamic shooter, a dynamic scorer. He's got the name. He's got the game. He's got size. He's 6'8". He's built like a man. And I think he's especially interesting to watch in this game. Obviously Dickinson, right? But Howard getting a team like IU, the attention that is going to be had on this game. He's in this closing stretch of which is probably his only college season while playing for his son or for his father. This would be like Juwan Howard scores 26 and it's a huge story. Does he kind of step up and deliver in that time when he's obviously going to be the focal point of the defense? Kobe Buffkin, though, is for me, the guy who's kind of the real, glue piece, whatever you want to call it. He's one of developing into whatever you want to say, one of the best two-way players in the Big Ten. Defense is good and getting better, bordering on great. Offense is kind of following a similar trajectory. And he's like a sophomore who has kind of figured out a lot of things about how he's the one who kind of sets, I wrote it earlier this week, like that he has understood that if he comes out flat on the defensive end, there's a residual effect and the team comes out flat on the defensive end. So like he's kind of the pacemaker for, I think, this team. And they were basically counted out probably after a loss to Penn State. What are we looking at there? Like 2 weeks ago, I want to say at this point, January 29th. So about a week and a half ago that they lost that game to fall to 11-10 overall, 5-5 in the league. And it was basically, okay, they're because of what they did in the non-conference, notably losing to Central Michigan, kind of out for the NCAA tournament. And lo and behold, signs of life. This is the age-old Big Ten question? Or is it, who you get to play and when you get to play them and where you get to play them? Or is it actually like wins on paper mean exactly what they mean? It's so hard to tell, but 3 straight wins at Northwestern, home against Ohio State, and home against Nebraska. It's not obviously a win at Northwestern's impressive, but Ohio State is a disaster, and Nebraska isn't good. But to their credit, they were supposed to blow out Nebraska, and they did. So they're like doing the things they're supposed to do. The next one is, can you beat somebody that is fairly legitimate? I mean, their best wins on their schedule right now are home wins over Maryland and Penn State, and the road win at Northwestern. That's about it. So at some point, you'd like to see them actually beat someone that matters. And in terms of their NCAA tournament resume, like every game is borderline desperation game at this point. They probably have to get to 12 in the league. It's kind of the conventional thinking right now. They're currently at 8-5,
which makes this obviously a very, very important game for them. Has this been a team that has responded in these types of situations under Juwan Howard? I mean, obviously they struggled early last season and kind of turned it around. Would you expect a really good performance from them in this game, just given the stakes?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, like those early teams, they certainly responded. That was, a lot of carryover type players, older guys who had been there and done that. When you look at this roster, okay, who are the guys that have been there and done that? It's slim pickings, man. It's Dickinson, who's a junior, and Terrence Williams. That's it, really. So a big part of this is, can Dickinson go and be the better first team All-American over Trace Jackson? Does he outplay Trace? Because if he doesn't outplay Trace, I don't see how Michigan wins unless something crazy happens. They make 13 threes, which would kind of also go against some degrees of convention. They're a good 3-point shooting team, but they ain't that good. So, the beyond that, beyond Dickinson, I'm saying it's Juwan Howard, scoring. It's, can Joey Baker come off the bench, give them 3 threes, outlier performances like that. But do they respond to this moment? This is kind of the game that I think answers those types of questions. There were key times early this year where they were expected to deliver, a good response and plainly didn't. Lost a close game to North Carolina it wasn't in Chapel Hill. It was in like Raleigh or something like that. And it came back out and lose to Central Michigan at home after Christmas break. Like, it's just, you can't do that. So we'll see. There's internally, they're saying that there's been, it is player only meeting season for struggling programs, and they've had their share, apparently, from what I've been told. Do those things resonate? I'm as curious as anyone.
Dickinson is an interesting character. And for most of the time that he and Trace, have been in school together, he's kind of had the upper hand. He'd won a lot of the head-to-head matchups until the Big Ten tournament last year. Alex and Dylan do their preseason Big Ten top 25 players. He's number 1 ahead of Trace. And now, as we kind of, round into the back half of this season, everybody would say that Trace is the better player right now. Part of that is obviously Trace just reaching this stratospheric level, but it also seems like Dickinson's progress has stagnated a little bit. Is that a fair assessment? And to what do you attribute that, if it is?
Yeah, and I think there's probably a few things going on there. Michigan's guard play has not been great, and it's super inexperienced. Dickinson went from playing with these point guards who really just followed an upward trajectory all year long and were guys playing their 100 and 130th in career college basketball games to playing with Doug McDaniel. There's a lot there in terms of just expecting someone to step in and get into, like, he doesn't have anything remotely close to kind of a 1-5, matchup with him that has like developed that great chemistry that you saw him have, with Devontae Jones last year and with Mike Smith during his freshman year, where it really developed a great chemistry, especially in those ball screens. Just hasn't really happened. Like, Dickinson's best touches are now kind of like just straight post touches and things like that. And now he can do a lot of it. He can make cross-court passes. He can obviously go and finish. He can play through a double team, but a lot's been asked from him, and not that much around it. So I think it's that, really, and there's obviously levels and layers, but I think that's like a fair thing. And yeah, you'd want him to just be like the man up and I'm just going to go just still dominate everyone. But like, it's like, he's not a video game character, there are things that matter around you.
Yeah. How would you assess the Juwan Howard experiment / tenure so far?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's been, there are takes. There are certainly a lot of takes around what Juwan has done at Michigan. But at the end of the day, he's made it to the second weekend twice. And a program like IU would love to say that. A lot of programs would love to say that. Now, Illinois in recent years, they didn't go to the second weekend, but Michigan found a way. And that 21 team was really good. Probably could have beaten UCLA to get to a Final Four, but they just ran into this it was like being locked in a closet, like with a animal. That UCLA team down the stretch in that year getting the Final Four was just brutal to play. Michigan ran into them and lost, but that was a good team. If Isaiah Livers isn't hurt in that game, they might have gone to the Final Four, and How much does that change his tenure? I don't know, but they were going to go to the NCAA tournament in his first year. That group dropped off significantly. If you guys remember, they were like a top 5 team at midseason and then kind of came undone. Elite Eight in his second year, 14-3 in the league in the COVID year. In 2022, last year, barely snuck in, obviously almost really kind of cratered with the loss to IU in the Big Ten tournament, but 11-9 in the league, go to the Sweet 16, lose to Villanova, no harm there. You're always going to get the people that say, oh, it's his own player. Now, he did it with Beeline's players and all that stuff. And, I get that there is a degree there that you can say is fair, but, he coached the teams. They did what they did, I think. One of the things that I find is most interesting is like when you look at the recruiting, I think there was always going to be this kind of expectation that it was going to be, big time, these loaded classes and this just kind of wild influx of talent that I don't really think you're seeing now. They had 2 NBA picks last year, right? Like obviously Caleb Houston, Moussa Diabate. But you look at this roster this year and it's like, there's a lot of good players. There's a lot of top 100 players. There's some top 50 players and things like that. I feel like, I hope I'm explaining this well. Like, I feel like Michigan fans just thought there was going to be just like pros showing up, lined up to come play for Juwan Howard. And, this year there is one and it's his son. Okay. But more pointedly to me in terms of like what wins games, like, 3 straight grad transfer point guards. Is that really a winning recipe in this league? I don't know. Now, maybe having some continuity here with Doug McDaniel, we'll see. But overall, I think the experiment's been fine. I mean, considering the questions that were around Juwan, and some of them were thinly veiled in a lot of ways, I thought. But this whole notion of like, well, he can't coach because he's an NBA guy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You just like spent the last decade like in the Heat organization with like Spoelstra and Pat Riley and is one of the most respected dudes in the NBA. I'm pretty sure he can draw up an ATO. Thanks. Like he could probably outcoach, Pat Chambers at Penn State or whatever. Like this is not some rube off the street. Like what are you talking about? So I think it's been generally successful. Obviously last year's incident at Wisconsin will always kind of hang over him. But, for the most part, publicly, he's hasn't done anything really of note, like good or bad. Like he's kind of just totally out of sight, out of mind. Like he doesn't do interviews. Take my word for it of anyone. He's not really interested in engaging in a lot of ways like that. And his press conferences are arguably the most boring in this conference. So like that's it. You want to question his coaching? Like sure, everything can be questioned, but I think for the most part it's fine. He's not in any danger by any means. The bigger question to me is, if Jet leaves this year, which I think he will, he's a first round pick, and the Sacramento Kings call this time, what is the level of response? Because the Knicks have called previously. The Lakers have called previously. And there was always the possibility, right? Like, but he knew his son Jet was coming through. His other son Jace is already on the team. Like, okay, if those guys are out, what is his level of interest? So we'll see.
Brandon, I'm always interested in the coaching aspect. Phil Martelli, when I thought he hired Phil Martelli, I thought that was a great hire to bring someone in. Sadie Washington, Howard Isley. But are there any interesting Phil Martelli? I always have loved talking to him, listening to him at coaching conferences and everything. And I think that was a great hire. And you say that Howard's doing a good job, but it just seems like that's a good staff. Yeah,
I mean, it's they've been intact since day one. John Calipari was the one who recommended Juwan hire Phil initially when he was talking about taking the Michigan job. Like before anything was formalized, he talked to Cal. Cal said, you're going to need like an OG conciliary type guy. And there's this dude in Philly named Phil Martelli. You should hire him. He just got let go at St. Joe's. And that's how that went down. So, you know, he knew he had that. He retained Sadi Washington from John Beilein's staff, and he brought in Howard Isley, who fellow longtime NBA player and coach, guy to work with the guards, guy from Michigan. You know, he played at BC, but he's from Southeastern Michigan, from Detroit. They've known each other since high school. So I think he also wanted someone who was, right, a guy who, when you got to say something privately, you got someone in the office who you go back to when you were both 17 years old and like they got like in a fight back in an AAU game in 1989, 1990 or so. I wrote about it, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember any details, but it's out there somewhere. But yeah, it's an interesting mix of old and new. I think at this point it's probably getting a little stale. I think staff turnover is a healthy thing in college basketball. This would be the 4th year for this staff intact. Next year would be the 5th. Sadi Washington has had head coaching interest, and I believe he's turned down some jobs from the directional Michigan schools, or, you know, not expressed mutual interest. Howard Isley is a guy that got passed over by his alma mater when Boston College hired, what's his name, Earl Grant or something like that, right? The guy from College of Charleston. Yeah, BC turning down or declining to go after Howard Isley and Mark Schmidt was an interesting move. But like, I wouldn't be surprised if Howard Isley had some interest to go do something somewhere. Phil, who knows? Older guy, obviously, but, you know, Juwan's apparently in talks with Penn State to play at the Palestra next year as a kind of tip of the cap to Phil. So if Michigan's supposed to go play at the Palestra next year, I don't know. Phil might go for one more go round or 2 more. Who knows? But that would be quite an experience. But to your question, you know, Sadi works with the defense, Howard Isley works with the offense, and Phil kind of does Phil. You know, so but Juwan is calling plays. Like, there was a big thing early on here, especially when Michigan was successful, like that Phil Martelli was some shadow head coach. And like, I can tell you with absolute certainty that it was total nonsense. They were running an NBA offense designed by Juwan and Howard Isley that I've watched a lot of St. Joe's basketball in my life. Okay. A lot. Class of, it was supposed to be 05. I graduated like 06 and a half. So I've watched a lot of St. Joe's basketball, still do. I can tell you, they never ran anything like Michigan was running in those first couple of years. So yeah, that was never ever the case. But I do think at this point, assuming, you know, Juwan doesn't get an NBA offer or whatever, and he's back for a 5th year, and they're kind of, they'd be starting over in some ways, but also potentially bringing a lot back, i.e. Hunter Dickinson, i.e. where else does he go? He probably has more money on the table with NIL than he does in a 2-way deal or whatever else he would get. I think they get a 4th year out of him. So, you know, you're not completely rebuilding, but you'd be replacing Jet Howard and bringing in some more younger players. All that said, I do think it would be good to get probably some fresh blood in the building at some point by any means.
Well, Brennan, I want to be respectful of your time, man. Really appreciate you coming and joining us. I just have one more question for you. And it's about officiating. You know, I thought one of the most interesting podcast episodes I've listened to all year about college basketball was the interview that you and Dylan did with Rick Boyages, which I thought really just provided some insight, kind of like real talk about officiating and how it worked. That was really interesting. And so I'm just curious, in light of having that conversation, what did that change about the way that you view officiating? And, what are your thoughts just on how officiating has been this year? Because there's obviously been a lot of hot button issues that have come out among pretty much all Big Ten fan bases.
Yeah, I think we'd probably like to see more direction, I think, at the top. Of course, everyone always wants officials on the court to be better, but you just keep asking and asking, but human nature is human nature, and guys are going to make mistakes, and there's going to be issues every year. It's obviously, I think, really boiled over to the point of there is no longer any acceptance of human error. And so I do think there's a degree of this that there should be some reason amongst fans and things like that to be a player's going to miss a free throw in the final 30 seconds of a game and a guy is going to miss a foul call. That's just the way it is. You're a basketball fan, be an adult, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, could there be better management of workload, of how replay is used, of all of these things? Yes. And the fact that so much of this is decentralized still just drives me crazy. And I don't know what the fix is there. But the system, how NCAA refereeing is managed reminds me of the entire actual construct of the NCAA itself, where it's if the three of us were sitting around today and said, hey, there's all these colleges in the country, let's start collegiate athletics. How would we design it, right? We wouldn't do anything in terms of how it's actually laid out now. Instead, it's just been jerry-rigged and fixed and here and moved there and blah, 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 as opposed to ever okay, well, this is dumb. Let's just rip this up and start over. What's a reasonable way of doing this? That's never happened with how we deal with officiating and how they're contracted and how they handle work and travel and all these things. Nobody would ever do it this way if you were starting over. So maybe you should start over.
Yeah. You're a basketball fan, be an adult. I'm going to start using that line a lot more. Something a lot of people need to hear. Well, hey, I'm clipping out. I'm going to clip out the piece that you talked about with Trace Jackson Davis. I'm going to send it to the people I know at Indiana. It is my goal to get you in there and do a story because I want to read that. But read his work at the Athletic.
Season. Plenty of times.
Plenty of time.
I could be down there Monday.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope it happens. You should be subscribing to The Athletic because you get Brendan's work. Listen to the Moving Screen Pod. He and Dylan do a great job. Brendan, a real pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time today.
No, it was my pleasure. I love following you guys. I do listen to some of the post-game pods here and there when I'm have an early morning walk with the dog. Yeah.
Nice.
Right. I fire it up because it's loaded up early, right? Because you guys record it, so it's available if I'm walking the dog at 6 a.m. It's new pod. Perfect.
That's great.
Yeah. So
one of these days, we need to get you and Ryan debating whether an NBA coach can coach in college. That would be a fun debate since he takes the opposite side of it.
If you can tell me the opposite side to think of anything, I'll come on. That's fine. Whether I believe it or not, that doesn't matter.
Cool. Thanks, man. Let's do this again in the future.
You got it. Love to.
Cool. Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah.
All right. The great Brendan Quinn from The Athletic and the Moving Screen Pod. Definitely listen to those guys. Great Big Ten basketball talk over there. And if you haven't listened to the episode with Rick Boyages, I highly recommend that one too. It's not too far back in their feed. They did it earlier this year. All right, Coach. How you doing? You feeling up to answering some mailbag questions?
Oh, absolutely. It's time to talk some hoops. Let's go.
I apologize if you guys heard there was doorbells ringing and all kind. My daughter was getting home from school. There was a lot of action here at the house. So if you got any background noise there, I apologize. All right. So let's get to some of these questions. The first question here, actually, we're going to take these first two questions together. So Greg says, any unofficial talk about Duncombe? And Jack says, what about CJ Gunn? He was getting playing time a few games ago, but hasn't gotten any in the last few. Do you see him in the portal? So here's the way that I'll address this, Coach. For a long time on this show, we kind of had the philosophy of we're not going to speculate on transfers. I still think that is a smart policy to have, especially in the season. But the landscape has changed a little bit. I mean, transferring wasn't quite as likely 4 or 5 years ago as it is now, especially with, guys being able to not have to sit out. And so it is a topic of conversation. So I don't think the questions are invalid. But, as a general rule, what makes a guy more likely to transfer? Well, I think there's two things: not getting a lot of minutes and living away from home. And if you've got a guy where two of those things apply, he's probably more likely to transfer. So, I would say, without getting into specifics, I think there are probably more things that I've heard just in the background about Duncombe that would seem to make a transfer more likely for him possibly. But, we've got to wait and see how that plays out toward the end of the season. There's nothing I've heard about CJ Gunn, again, outside of, hey, here's a guy who was playing and now he's not. And that always, I guess, puts a guy at risk of being a transfer. But there's nothing I've heard that suggests, anything other than that. So that's kind of how I would address it, with those two guys individually, because I don't think it's our place to speculate too much about that stuff, especially during the season. But I understand why people ask the questions. You have to in this day and age. Do you have anything to add on either one of those guys?
It's always a decision that players can make, families can make now. It's made a lot easier than it was in the past. So you're going to have that. And one, for me, it's not an indicator that something's wrong with Coach Woodson or the staff. Almost every staff in the country is going to have some level of turnover. And if they don't, that'll be a surprise because when you have 13 scholarships, you have guys who might love being at a school, and then they decide, you only got a year or two left. I'm not going to play here. I'm behind. I'm not mad. I want to just leave and go play. There's a tremendous amount of factors, and these are young men and their families, and some of those factors might be good decisions. Some of them might be, just kind of, off the cuff, not happy type of thing. And I think we just need to respect their decisions and talk about it when it happens, and not so much. I do think that everyone who's not in a rotation could potentially transfer because of playing time. Now, if the coaches have talked to them and maybe what's in the future and, hey, stick with us this first year, we're going to have some people leaving. Here's where we see you. It doesn't mean that everyone who's not playing is gone automatically. But I think it is, in a general sense, Jerod, that people who aren't playing or aren't playing as much could potentially see that as a main reason of trying to find a program where they would fit in a little bit better. But other than general, I don't want to talk about CJ or Logan, just because out of respect for them as individuals.
Yep. All right, from Joey, what would have to happen over the next 8 games for you to worry about this team? I feel like we have a really good idea of who this team is, one that can beat anyone when they're firing all cylinders, but can be inconsistent. I guess home losses would make me worry, but with the Big Ten title pretty much wrapped up, I find myself wanting to just play out the string and get to the NCAA tournament to see what we've really got. It's an interesting question. What would make you worry?
I'm not sure, Jerod. I'm at a point where I'm going to worry about the team. There are things that I enjoy and don't enjoy, offense, defense, or some of those particular things. But this 7 out of 8, the bounce back from a loss at Maryland to win 2 outstanding games against outstanding opponents, just shows me that the program is in a good place. It is a 5th, 6th, 7th seed in the NCAA tournament, more than likely. Obviously, a series of losses would not be good, but that stuff happens in basketball. Michigan State's in good hands in a good program, and they've lost some games. I do think Indiana has made progress under Mike Woodson. We are winning basketball games on a regular basis now after a stretch of, major injuries from Hood Schifino being out, and then Xavier being out, and then Race being out. We've just found ourselves, and we've always said it's how you play. And I know we didn't play well at Maryland, but that was a competitive game, chances to get back in it to the end. It wasn't a horrific, horrible effort. So I don't know that there's anything that would really make me worry. I think, obviously, a long losing streak right now, you might worry about where you are in the tournament or selection in the tournament. But I don't know that this team's going to lose 6 out of 7. Maybe go 500, be in the tournament, Selection Sunday comes, we're enjoying Selection Sunday. I think that's just the natural progression. I think I'm guilty of this. I think a lot of people are. We want that Final Four. We want that next banner immediately. And any coaching staff coming in, even with great players, it takes some time to get where you want. And if you would have told me we're ranked 19th, 20th, and 5th, a 5 seed at the beginning of the year, I'm taking it. So I'm not worried. I get happy when we win. I get a little ticked off when we lose. But worry, I think that's past me a little bit. Major worry.
I agree with that. I guess the way that I would look at it is, this winning streak, this bounce back, since the 3-game losing streak, a lot of it has been built on playing at home. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is the regular season. You play at home, you play on the road. That said, they did have a very good road performance against Illinois, which shows you, hey, they can do this, and they can deliver a really good performance away from home. So that helps. But I think if we really, kind of drill into this question and find something that might be a worry, the last 2 road performances haven't been great. They didn't play great at Minnesota, but they won. They didn't play great at Maryland, and they lost. So I think with 4 out of the next 5 on the road, 4 out of the next 5, all against teams that can definitely beat you in their place, but teams that you could go beat, I think. Obviously Purdue being the toughest, but, Michigan State, that's going to be a tough atmosphere, but they're a team that Indiana matches up pretty well against right now. Michigan and Northwestern, kind of the same thing. I think if we spend the majority of our time in these 4 road games playing more like we did against Minnesota and Maryland than we did against Illinois, it'll make me a little worried about our ability to carry some of the really good play that we've seen during this winning streak into the Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament, because all those games are away from home. Now, they're neutral, so it's not the exact same as, on the road. But I think that's the thing I would like to see. I'd like to see Jalen get a little more consistent with his shot away from home. I'd like to see Trey and Tamar be more consistent offensive forces away from home. And so if that doesn't happen, I guess the worry would be, okay, maybe the ceiling isn't quite as high as I would have hoped. Because if they go do that on the road in some of these games, now you start thinking a lot more stuff is possible. So I'm kind of with you. Like, I feel really good. I feel stable. I like what this team can do. If they just play kind of normal over the rest of the regular season, I'm going to feel good heading into tournament play. But if the road performances are closer to the Minnesota, Maryland, it is going to worry me just a little bit, because I want to see some of the things that have been difference makers at home. I'd like to at least see some of that start to translate away from home more consistently.
Yeah, it depends on how you define worry, too. I took it as a macro. I'm not worrying macro about the program. Some basketball play, there's some concern maybe with those road performances. I totally agree with what you're saying there, but macro, I've kind of gone, up and down since Coach Woodson's been here as a fan. And I'm just at the situation where whether I like what they do offensively or not, it's worked. And we're winning games at Illinois. So I'm focusing on the fact we went on the road and beat a top 25 team in Illinois. We beat the number 1 team in the country. We beat and we got revenge over Rutgers. But winning in the Big Ten on the road is tough. And then the other thing, I'll go back to what Mike DeCourcy said, is we guarded at Minnesota, we guarded at Maryland, and that's exactly what you want to do. When nights when your offense is gone, you want to be able to guard. And in those games, we were able to win at Minnesota. We were able to be somewhat in a game until late at Maryland because we were guarding. We did not do that in that 3-game losing streak. And so, the road is just brutal wherever I think it's going to be tough for Indiana to win. I think we're better than Michigan. We should win. But they're backed into a corner NCAA tournament-wise. We're going to get their best. And I think the Northwestern game is more of a revenge. I think, you're going to go in. You already lost to Northwestern. And the matchup inside especially, I think TJD will really be focused in that game. But you're absolutely right basketball-wise. Shooting away from home, the guard play away from home is a basketball concern. I took that question more as, are you worried that the program and this and that? No, I'm trying to be a little more even keel with the direction of the program under Coach Woodson. And and not be so caught up in the standing offense and all of that. We just need good, we just need good players, and we've had them in the last 7 out of 8. So that's where I'm at.
All right, let's take these next two together. Mike says, any update on the return of X? Is he still shooting with a boot on? And then our buddy Elbows In says, let's talk about how teams approach bringing back a player like X into a team that is playing so well. What are the risks and rewards? Let me take the first part. You take the second part. I have gotten 2 different messages today. One from someone who said, get ready for X to play. He's back. And another one from someone who said it still sounds like it's 2 to 3 weeks. So take that for what it's worth. He's clearly nearing, his return. I'm kind of to the point now where I'm not going to be surprised when we get the tweet 90 minutes before the game, like X is, in uniform and warming up. It feels like we're getting, closer and closer to that, but I don't have an exact sense yet of if that's going to be Saturday against Michigan or if we're talking, more a couple weeks down the road, like Michigan State, Purdue type thing. So I don't really know, but we're at least getting now to the point where it's kind of, I would be on X watch a little bit, kind of looking for that, in kind of the pregame stuff. But the more interesting question, and Mike DeCourcy talked about this some when we spoke with him, is the risks and rewards of bringing a guy like X back, where everybody has kind of fallen into their roles and, things are going well. And look, the thing with X is it's his great strength and his great weakness. He knows one way to play, and it is all out, and he's not someone who you put on the court in kind of a supporting role. Like, if he's out there, he's X, and he's having impact for better or worse, mostly for better, but we know what some of the downsides are. And so I'm curious kind of how you approach that generally, and then what we know about X. What are some of the unique challenges of bringing a guy like him in when you've kind of got a freshman point guard who's kind of settled into his role now?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you can go about it. One, it's X's team. You put the ball back in X's team, and Hood Schifino moves off the ball predominantly. You can only have one major one, as Mike said. You do that because he's the senior, he's the veteran. That's what he does better. The other way is to say, hey, we got something going. Hood Schifino's going to bring the ball up. You're going to be a secondary driver and pick and roll guy on the side. We still need you to do that. That's just an X and O strategy that I think – but you play him. I think medically, is there a minutes limitation for him would be a concern. But you don't – I don't think you just gradually try to incorporate him back in. You build him up in practice, and once he gets cleared, you've got to go short of a hard minutes limitation. And I just think you put him back in, one, because that he's earned it, and two, he's going to make you a better basketball team at his best. The concern is – a couple things. Physically, is he ready to play that great pressure defense, get downhill? Is he mentally ready to run the offense, do the things that he needs to do, play at a high level, take the right shots? Because when he does that at the end of the year last year, man, he is unbelievable. When he doesn't do that, then our whole team kind of suffers in some poor play because he's trying to force stuff too much. So the mental side of it is just as important as the physical side, because now you have Hood Schifino, you have Trey Galloway. They're all working in cohesion, and now you're sticking someone in. But it's something you're going to have to – the risk is too great not to do it in 25, 30-minute stretches, because he does make you better. You also worry about the back end, Jerod, too. Does Tamar lose time? Does where does that rotation suffer? Miller Kopp has found his niche, as Mike said as well today. So it is a dynamic which you just got to talk to the team. And again, I've thought all along that Coach Woodson was a very good communicator in his team, and very honest and brutally honest with his guys, whether it be roles or discipline or whatever. And he's going to have to be on his best to kind of mend all of that, because, man, you win 7 of 8 with this group, and now even though everyone knows it's good and everyone loves X and wants X to be there, there's some dynamics of play that are going to come in that need to be massaged and watched. But, man, if we can win 7 of 8 without X, and we bring X in at average to better than average, working our way in, and I will tell you and everyone else, we probably need to be patient for a game or two. The first couple games is going to be sloppy. his decision making and all of that, and so therefore we may take a loss or something, not to sit there and blame X and question whether he should be back or not, or those things. Please avoid that. We want X back. We're better with X, and the ultimate goal now is I think we have enough buildup that you can handle a loss or two in trying to get that team back into things. I really don't see a situation where we're not in the NCAA tournament, where we're not in position to make a run in the Big Ten tournament, and so that's only going to make us better.
Yeah, and look, I think Coach Woodson has handled Race's reintegration well. He's not playing as many minutes, but he's starting. He's finishing games. I think he's been put in a spot to succeed. And, you're right about X. I mean, at the absolute minimum, once he comes back, you've got another ball handler. We don't have to live in constant fear of Jalen and Trey picking up foul trouble and not having someone who can initiate the offense. So all that stuff. And then, so you're going to be better because of that baseline. Same thing defensively. And then it's just how much better can you get after that? And I think the fact that X is a great teammate and beloved by his teammates is going to help. I think if maybe it was, if there's a different relationship there, then maybe that wouldn't be as good. X is going to go out and play balls to the walls, and it will probably take him a little while to figure out when to go, when to pull back. He's going to be a little out of rhythm, just like we've seen from Race. But I agree with you. If you have to sacrifice, I don't mean sacrifice like you want to lose the games, but you go out and you let him play in the regular season because you know what the upside can be. And whether I would rather be a 6 seed with X than a 4 seed without X. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because I just think the upside of having him, he's such a good player. He really is. And so I'm fascinated to see what happens with it.
It's what we started out all year, going back to North Carolina, where you had multiple drivers on the court at all times. I mean, now you have Hood Schifino and X out there, and then when one needs a blow, you bring in Galloway. So you just still now have 2 ball handlers that can run the pick and roll, put Trace Jackson Davis in motion. When he catches at the elbow or the high post, it can dive and drive. I mean, they've gone to more of that action here offensively. Man, and nothing against Tamar and Miller, but those guys can't drive it as well as those other 3 can, and that's the name of the game. So, yes, it makes us better. We want it to happen as soon as possible, but I'm expecting a shaky X for at least a week, and when you do that in these tight games, especially on the road, the team could run into some struggles as well.
Yeah. I will say the blessing in disguise, I suppose, or if there's been a positive from X being out, it's really allowed Trey to spread his wings and develop more, as a guy who can do a lot of things. And so now you bring him back and you add what Trey's already added. Boy, it can make Indiana really, really dynamic. Okay, let's hit some of these other ones. From Barbara, our former players in support of Coach Woodson. Some post-positive comments on social media. Jared Jeffries was at the Purdue game. Our former players welcome at practice or into the locker room before and after the game. Yes, it certainly seems so. I think there have been maybe some isolated isolated comments maybe from former players that have, questioned certain things when the team's been playing bad. I think most of that comes from a place of just really caring about the program and wondering why things, aren't going very well. But I think overall, on balance, it seems like that's kind of brought a lot of the, the quote unquote family together, and people have been very supportive. So, yeah, I think the answer to that question is yes. I think the vast majority do support Coach Woodson. This from Jim: who had the better freshman season, Jalen or Romeo? Which I found to be a really interesting, probably an unfair comparison, but an interesting question. I'm curious to get your thoughts, Coach.
Man, without preparing, I'm going to say Romeo, but that's probably just based on stats. But the reason you go Jalen Hood Schifino is because we're winning more, and I like winning. And stats are stats. And I'm not trying to diss Romeo. I mean, he's a heck of a talent. But Hood Schifino has impacted winning more than Romeo, is my quick answer. But statistically, Romeo was a gift that we just didn't provide enough around him and coaching and all of that stuff. So I think Romeo is my quick answer without necessarily really thinking about it. But, man, I'm a big Jalen Hood Schifino fan, and I'm going to watch him as he goes in the pros. For some reason, I'm not big on the one-and-dones, And the people who have been left early after 1 year from IU, I don't necessarily follow them as much. Give me 2 years or 3 years, like Victor and that, and I'm okay. And I really follow and watch in the pros. But the 1 year guys, but I think I'm going to follow Hood Schifino because I just like his demeanor. I like the fact that he's come in and is a defender and an offensive player as well. So, yeah, I don't know that I answered that well, but I'm going to go with Romeo because I think he was just a better scorer and a better player all around.
It's a hard question. I mean, the way that it's phrased also, who had the better freshman season? Well, I'm sure Jalen is enjoying himself a lot more than Romeo enjoyed himself during that ridiculous 2019 season where we lost 12 out of 13. And I think it's kind of unfair. I mean, Jalen stepped into something that is – it's certainly proven to be a more stable situation, even though things looked a little shaky there mid-season. But just a better supporting cast around him, and so I think in that sense, Jalen has played his role very well. But I think it is very easy to underrate what Romeo was as a freshman. If you just look at it statistically, either in raw numbers or efficiency numbers, Romeo is basically better than Jalen in everything but 3-point percentage. And obviously his wrist injury affected that. Romeo was a very underrated defender, a much more disruptive defender in terms of steals and blocks than Jalen is. And Romeo, if you go back and look, in the big games Indiana won, when we beat Wisconsin, when we won at Michigan State, and there were others, the Louisville game, he made so many big plays and big shots down the stretch just to give that team a chance to win as many games as it did. And I think history is going to smile on Romeo's 1 year at Indiana, once people get a little bit further removed from it. And I know you can't totally divorce a player who only plays one season from the results of that season. But I think Romeo was the better overall player. I think Jalen has been able to contribute more to winning, in part just because he's had a lot more positives go on around him. But it really is splitting hairs. They're two phenomenal players. So I think it really kind of just depends on whatever criteria you're going to look at. But they're, two of the best freshmen we've had here in a long time. They're both awesome. Okay, next up from Jim Tom Hoosier. Based on the remaining schedule, what do you expect their record and conference finish will be? Because predicting Indiana records ahead of time always works out real well.
We got 3 home games and 4 road games, right?
Is that right? Do we still have 3 or do we have 2 home games? No, you're right. We finished with 2 home games. Yes.
Yeah. I say minimum we win 3. Minimum. We go 3-4. So that puts us.
Oh, we have 3. Yeah, 3 home games and 4 road games because we have the Illinois game too.
I think somewhere 3-4, 4-3, and that doesn't mean we play bad. I think going to Purdue is going to be brutal. Michigan State. I would love to get 2 road games next with Michigan and Northwestern, and think we can. But if you split those, hopefully not slip up at home. Now you've gotten 4. And you go to Michigan State, that duel of Michigan State and Purdue, and you're really playing with house money kind of because those teams probably should win at home even when you play well. So, I would like to see 4. If you see 4, you're at 12 and 8, and I think a lot of us had us in that 12, 13, 14 range at the beginning of the season, not counting injuries. I mean, honestly, if we finish 12 and 8, Jerod, and we don't lose any players – we win at least 2 more. That's 14 and 6. I think that's pretty solid year, and then especially to come back from all the adversity of 3 major players missing time in most of our losses. That's another epiphany that I had too. Is like, damn, coach, relax. You lost Hood Schifino, then you lose X, then you lose Race, and you're bitching about losing. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So I gave myself a talk.
Gave yourself a little pep talk.
It happened after we beat Purdue. I gave myself a little talk. We all need to get inside our heads a little bit and be honest with ourselves. Like, man, any program, we're a 5 seed and we've lost 3 major players for significant amounts of games, and most of our losses have come at that time. That's why I don't worry. But this is a brutal stretch, Jerod, and it doesn't mean we're bad if you go on the road and lose to Michigan. It doesn't mean we're bad. Yes, some concerns or worry or whatever the definition is, because you want to win them all. Obviously, you don't watch a game just kind of watch a game. You watch to win, or you play to win the game. But 3-4 minimum, 4-3 likely. If anything over that, man, we're cooking. Is my guess.
Yeah, that's pretty much right where I'm at. I think that's well said. From David, has Malik turned the corner on his frequent fouling? He played 32 minutes with 2 fouls combined against Rutgers and Purdue.
I'm going to tell you, too, here's a little part of that epiphany. I think the coaching staff identified that fouling problem, and I saw Trey playing a lot better. I saw Malik playing a lot better without fouling. Now maybe, knock on wood, that's just 2-game stretch where things went their way, but I see their hands being back a little bit more. I see Trey, when he's closing out, is really throwing his hands back, so someone got a hold of him in individual development, or they're drilling that in practice, because I'm seeing both guys' hands a little bit higher when they body up and not so low, and it's almost deliberate that they throw their hands up. Trey, both of those guys. So the answer to Malik is yes. I think he is on that spot, and I watch him get 3 fouls in 10 minutes tomorrow, and that'll show you what I know. But there's a lot of things that goes into that. The other one thing with Malik is he got to stop going for shot fakes. Like, he plays really hard, bodies people up, stops them, has good position, and then that guy will pull back, and he just then he wants to block shots and play so hard, but he's got to be the second guy off the ground. You work that hard. Like, his defense has been solid, and then he's the first guy off the ground, and then that guy's got him, and then they lean in, and he can't stop his body, and he fouls. So, the coaching staff seems like they're working with him. Be the second guy off, and just, you may not block the shot, but you discourage the shot instead of fouling and giving 2 free throws. But his lower body work has been fantastic defensively. His feet are fantastic defensively. It's just been his hands and his lean as far as Malik, and the same with Galloway, his hustle and his in position, but then he's got the hands, and that draws the attention of the officials. So that's something that sometimes we don't, as fans, see coaches do. But that one technique, I thought, against 2 quality opponents too. It's not like you're playing, Southwestern Cupcake State and you don't have to guard, so you don't foul. These were 2 solid teams. So I think and I hope that it has been corrected. We'll see if it stays.
Malik had a media availability today, and I thought it was great. I think his development story is a really good one, because while he was struggling, Coach Woodson was very open in his comments, basically saying Malik just needs to learn how hard you have to play at this level. He's really skilled. We believe in him. He's got to learn how hard. And Malik said the same thing today. The coaches have been teaching me how hard I have to play, and he's kind of figured that out. And it's like he figured out how to play hard, but then he couldn't figure out how to play hard without fouling, and now he's bringing that into it. And when you add that with his natural fearlessness and his incredible offensive skill, I mean, that guy has so many things he can do on the offensive end. You're seeing the production, and I think there's still another level or 2 that he can get to, and that is another reason to be optimistic about what this team can do down the stretch. All right, let's hit these last few here relatively quickly. From Roy, please share your thoughts on the pros and cons of dialing back on minutes played for our starters to keep them fresh for the tourney.
Yeah, I just think it's vital. You have in a lot of sports tapering, and your Olympic sports people, cross country, swimming, all of that, you taper towards the end of the season so you have peak performance. I just think that applies to basketball too, because you're going to have to play 3 or 4 games in a row in the Big Ten tournament. You're going to have to go in the NCAA tournament and play a Thursday, a Saturday, Friday, Sunday. And the wear and tear of an entire season will get to you. I think we saw that with Race last year. So much was asked of him, and he just ran out of gas. So the reduction in minutes is to try to protect that, but you also have to win games. So, Jerod, maybe at the point now, if you're a 5 seed and there's no locks because you can't lose out, you still need to win games. But you do have a little bit of leeway now that, 3 or 4 minutes here, 3 or 4 minutes there, and then you've also built up your depth to where you can trust some of these guys a little bit more. I just think that's important. And that's not a criticism. It's hard. Man, you're coaching. You want to play your best. Like, who in the hell would ever want to take TJD out? I mean, it's absolutely dumb to take TJD out, but you want him playing in the Final Four at the same level that he's playing right now. You don't want to just put everything you got in mid-February and then not have him at your best. So that is a tough thing to do. I mean, you don't want him out. Dang, but I do think you got to reduce the minutes some.
I know Woody might want him out so he doesn't catch him so fast on the all-time scoring list. Maybe taper his minutes a little bit there. Max has a related question. Said, do we need to find a way to get TJD more rest? And I think, we would all say yes if we can. If so, what lineup do you trust out there without him? Some of that may be dependent on the time of the game, because a lineup that you would trust in the clutch might be a little bit different than a more fun lineup or a more explosive lineup that you might want to try, with 16 minutes left in the second half. But what would be, if I'm telling you right now, okay, Trace is in foul trouble and we're in, there's 6 minutes left, in a big game, what would you trust as the five out there the most?
I think you just slide Malik in.
Yeah.
You just slide Malik into the five because you're going to need Race out there for all that cleanup stuff that Mike was talking about and that senior leadership. It seems like he trusts Race down the stretch. There's been a lot of talk about why not leave Malik in. Malik's been playing well. He'll jump hook over Edey. He's really played well. Do you want him? And he played well down the stretch at Xavier too, so there's some level of trust there. But if you had to go, I mean, then whatever guards were playing well out there. But I think you just slide Malik in there. I think he's at a spot now, playing hard, not fouling, doing whatever, where he's that next man up at that five. I think you would and that's how your team is set up, to have a couple bigs. You put Race in there, and now you move a Miller Kopp down, which we've all been clamoring for, but that's just not going to happen right now until the roster's different. That I'm not sure you want to go to that in a foul trouble or a situation, because unless it's a matchup dependent situation. But I think those are your two options. You go Malik or you go small. If TJD, I think those are the two options.
Yeah, and it would probably be dependent on matchups. I guess that would be the argument for going small is, Trace is just, he's such a productive player that if you don't have him in there, you're not going to have his shot blocking, and Malik's not going to replace that, so you're probably going to need to get a little bit more scoring. I guess that would be the argument is, do you play Race or Malik and then surround him with shooters, move Miller down and maybe put, Scoop in so you have another shooter in there with Jalen and Trey. It just probably depends on who you're playing.
I just think Race is struggling right now to score in the post. So that eliminates any post scoring. Renew can score in the post. And again, that's just because Race is coming back off that knee. He doesn't have the lift. He doesn't have the quickness inside. He's in there for toughness, rebounding, blocking a shot here or there, running the right stuff as a senior. That's what he's needed right now until he gets back. But, boy, Malik can score the basketball. So if you need some inside scoring, you're going to have to go to Malik. Maybe you go to Malik and small, depending on matchups. But, I'm pretty comfortable that Malik's back to where he was early in the season.
And the big thing that Race has been doing, and that I think is keeping him in the games late, is he's making his free throws. I think he's 16 of 18 from the line since he's been back.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Again, for those of you who are in the community, I just did some research on some of the lineup stuff. And look, in the 5 games since Race has been back, we are better with Malik on the floor overall, right? If you just look at the overall numbers, our net rating is better with Malik on the floor. The issue is it's a small sample size, and so the big run against Ohio State does a lot of heavy lifting in there. And, Race has really been impactful in some particular situations, like the end of the Purdue game, the end of the Minnesota game. And I think that's probably a role that he's going to keep because the coaching staff trusts him. I am kind of interested to see, as this goes forward, if Malik does start getting some more minutes in the first half and then toward the middle of the second half when Woody likes to go to his bench, because the productivity is there. That's going to be interesting to see. And I would not, if you told me, hey, Malik is going to start getting 4 or 5 more of those minutes than Race, but Race is the guy that kind of starts and ends, I would not be against that. I do think that there is probably some room there for Malik, if he can stay out of foul trouble, to get a few more minutes, because he just right now is able to do more things and provide more of a threat on both ends than Race is. But Race is proving that, when you kind of want the old guy in there that can do the veteran stuff at the end of the game, that stuff matters, and he's been able to do that so far. So just something to watch as we go forward.
Old guys sometimes get the job done.
That's right. That's right, we do. All right, last question from Tony. And we kind of covered this, but it's a little bit of a different angle. He says, how much is it being under or overblown about X's eventual return? It will have to be measured and evaluated, but it seems to me that the prevailing view right now by many fans is it will be disruptive and detrimental. That is certainly the fear. He said, I would like to think that he will have had ample time in practice to start getting some run and getting reintegrated to the team before we ever actually see him dressed out for a game. Seems like many assume he will be cleared on a Tuesday and start logging 38 minutes in a game on Wednesday. And you kind of hinted at that. You know, if you're going to bring X into, you know, what is a team now that's on a good groove, he needs to practice and kind of work himself up. Maybe not to being able to play his full allotment of minutes because he was a 40-minute guy, you know, before, a guy who could play that much. But you've got to have a pretty good, like, you're not going to put X in at 50%. There's no point for him or for the team. You know, so I think he would have to prove that he's at least, you know, whatever percentage you think Race is of his normal play, he's got to at least be there, you know, where he can do some of that stuff and have proven it in practice and, you know, given those guys a little bit of a chance to reacclimate, even if he's more playing kind of the, you know, I mean, one thing that I could see is him kind of taking over the Rob Finney role from last year, where he's kind of in a backup point guard, defensive type role, you know, kind of leading that. We don't really have the second unit as much this year as we did last year, but I could see him kind of being worked into that way a little bit, you know, and being a guy who can then take over the primary ball handling duties when Jalen gets a rest. But yeah, I think it would be irresponsible and coaching malpractice to just throw him out there without having seen, you know, him get back to doing some of those things in practice.
Absolutely.
And giving him some ramp-up time.
And that's what I said. When he's ready to play, you're going to play him up to the minute restriction by the medical people. Plain and simple. And to anyone who thinks it's going to be disruptive, I told you it might be a game or two to it gets its fill. But, you know, if you like donuts and you have 6 donuts and you have a chance to get, you know, 3 more, you're not going to turn down the 3 more donuts. You're going to ask for the other 3 donuts, and now you have 9 donuts, and it's going to be a great Saturday morning. You don't turn down extra in anything. I mean, you just don't. X, we want X back, and I don't care if it's 25 minutes if Tim Garl says or whatever. X makes us better. The question is, do we have the X back that we had at the end of last year? And even if we don't, the kid has earned a right to come back and play, be disruptive or not. Give me those extra donuts soon. I'm hungry.
That's not an analogy that I was expecting, but it strangely works. And look, if he comes back and he struggles and the team struggles for a little bit, you're a basketball fan. Be an adult. And,
that's right.
You know, that's right.
That's a great line.
And I'm pulling that out. We're going to start using that as a drop. You're a basketball fan. Be an adult. We all need to be told that sometimes, you know?
Get inside
all right,
your head. Figure it out. Enjoy this team. We're winning again.
Hey, if you've listened this far and you aren't in our community yet, well, you should get in our community. It's assemblycall.com/community. This is a taste. We don't do this every Friday, but we do it probably like 90% of the Fridays during the season. And again, this doesn't even count Coach's Corner stuff, Coach Adranya's IU film room. You know, I mentioned I did however long that article was, 1,500, 2,000 words, analyzing Race and Malik. So you get that kind of next level stuff when you're in the community. Plus, as I saw someone put here in the chat, the paywall helps to keep the haters out. It does. That's really the reason why we did the paywall in the first place, was to keep a lot of the idiots out of there that end up coming into the chat mob and the drive-by commenters and all that nonsense. Like, it's a good place to go have good, smart, intelligent conversation. As long as Jay's not in there, it's good for the intelligent conversations. You know, Jay does pop in every now and then with some bracketology takes that no one needs to hear. Yeah. But other
you
than
get
that,
real intelligent donut stories too. I mean, it's top notch.
Yeah. The analogies are just
the analogies are just top notch. The drops are top notch. I mean, it's worth, you know, the monthly subscription fee just to see how much an idiot I can be.
So anyway, we'd love to have you join us. assemblycall.com/community. There's a free trial there. And we, of course, will be here live after the Michigan game. We'll get out of here on that, Coach. Give me your gut feeling on how Indiana comes and plays Saturday, heading on the road after 2 really impressive home performances.
I'm a little concerned because I think Michigan is going to circle this game and be ready to go. They need it. They need it bad. And I just really, you're right about the last couple of road games. The reason that where I'm not as concerned is we've had an extra day of rest, unlike the Maryland game.
Yeah.
And I think this team has found a focus. So I think we're in a battle. I hope that we find a way to pull it out. I'm not going to be really disappointed if we don't, because I just think winning on the road is tough. Winning on the road against a program that's desperate and talented. I mean, this team has talent. It's not just a bad team. It has talent. At the beginning of the year, this is one you're like, man, we hope we can win it. I'm a little worried, but I'm going to be rooting them on. Again, I'm in a better place in the big picture. I think regardless, we're gonna be okay.
Yeah, I'm approaching these next two games. I really want to see us win one of them. Right. I think that would show a lot. If you can win at Michigan, and this Northwestern team is good. Like, this is not the normal Northwestern team. They're solid. They've actually weirdly played better on the road than at home. I want to see us win one. But if we go and we give, a good professional effort against Michigan, but they're playing with their hair on fire and making a bunch of shots and they beat us, look, we'll get on the post-game show and be frustrated for an hour because that's what we do. But I don't think it's going to be too much cause for concern. I mean, we got to go compete. Like, you can't have a total backslide. But there's a chance that we could lose, both of these games and feel okay with it based on how we play. So I think that's an important context to go into these games with. That said, I think if we can go pull one of them out, it'll really help solidify what we've seen over the last 8 games. It'll really tell you, like, hey, a lot of what we saw is real. Probably not going to go win both of them, but go get one. And that, to me, really helps keep the momentum going, especially if you can then beat Illinois and then have another, duo of road games and then see if you can steal one of those. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a fascinating game because Michigan has dudes. The matchups are interesting. I'm really, really fascinated to see how we approach it and how we come out and play. I think the one thing in our favor is TJD has just been on a mission, and I know he'll take the mano-a-mano matchup against Hunter Dickinson seriously because it's one he hasn't fared that well in, and Michigan's beaten us 9 out of 10 games. We've had a good half against them basically. Yep. So I'm really fascinated to see how we come out and play. Should be a fun one, and hopefully we play well and we can have a nice positive post-game show. All right. Well, Coach, always good talking to you here on Banner Friday.
Yes,
we
sir.
appreciate Mike DeCourcy being here. We appreciate Brendan Quinn being here. We appreciate all of the mailbag questions. Those of you who become new community members, we appreciate you giving us a shot and trying us out. And all you current community members, you all are awesome. We appreciate you guys being here. And have a great Friday night. Have a great Saturday day. And we will talk to you guys tomorrow night on the postgame show. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. You're a basketball fan. Be an adult.
Be an adult.
See you, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. See ya, Jerod.